Chapter 20, Rebounds. St. John, Minnesota, January 3rd, 1986. Father Gary McKenzie parked his Chevette, stepped out of the car, and took a dozen paces across the parking lot to stare out at the frozen waters of Lake Manitou. What are you? Who are you? The Manitou did not answer. During the Vietnam War, Gary would often wake up early and observe the beauty of nature. He knew that by noon his world would transform into a living hell. The current vast horizon of white also hid a horror that was slowly waking up. Gary's shiver caused him to pivot for the warmth of Golden Shores Nursing Home. Death and tragedy frequently filled his days in unexpected ways. Nevertheless, he held a routine and pace with his weekly schedule, which included visits to the hospitals and nursing homes. As soon as he stepped through the glass sliding doors, the familiar sound of a live piano greeted him. Carson Looning, playing songs written decades before he was born, sat behind the keys. The paraplegic entertainment director would be his final meeting of the stop. First, Gary found his way to the business office and knocked on the door of Molly Chauvin. Like many in the nursing home, Molly had started as a part-time employee and worked her way into a full-time management position. Molly gave birth to her first daughter just a few months after graduating, and her unplanned pregnancy kept her from going to college. At 30, she still had obvious beauty despite the weariness in her eyes. Gary had counseled Molly and Mark Chauvin through a difficult marriage, but in recent years the couple had settled into a more amicable routine. "Do you have time for a talk?" he asked from the doorway. "I'm just working on a new schedule," she said. "It's so nice to have the holidays behind me. I suppose you're exhausted too." "The shepherd never really truly has a day off from tending his flock," he answered honestly. "I saw Wally Crane's truck park in the parking lot." His wife was admitted last night. The doctors have her on a medication to prevent another stroke, but it's going to be a long road to recovery for her. Father Gary reached into his front pocket for the spiral notepad. "What room is Nancy's?" As Molly looked up the room number, Gary reflected on his hospital visit to Brainerd the afternoon after the house fire. The earliest rumors claimed that Nancy had been hospitalized due to the fire, but neither smoke inhalation or flame had been the culprit. Once doctors diagnosed the stroke, her erratic behavior made sense to everyone but Wally. He could not get past his grief over both tragic events. "It's so sad," Molly said after giving him the information. "They're supposed to be enjoying their retirement together." Another casualty in the coming war? Wally Crane was the glue that bound the Asante Lodge together, and Nancy's stroke effectively removed him. "I've got a favor to ask. I've got a young lady who's looking for a fresh start. She's had some tough times lately, and I think a change of pace might help her get back up on the horse, so to speak. She's from Split Rock, but I think you might know her. She's Charlie Morrison's niece." The gasp was unexpected until Gary remembered that Lacey Morrison's uncle was close in age to Molly. His 2-year battle with lung cancer ended in early fall. "Of course. What are you thinking?" "I know you probably don't have the budget for it, but I was hoping you could make her an assistant to Carson Looning." "I barely have budget for Carson. Lacey's just a pixie, so I don't think she'd be good for either the kitchen or direct care, but she's a musical prodigy, and she'll charm the residents, I'm sure. Her rough times are more than just the loss of her uncle, though. She needs to be away from her peers over at Split Rock. She needs to see the bigger picture, and I think playing cards with residents could be as good for her as it would be for them. Just a few shifts to start with. What do you say?" "I'll figure something out. Tell her she can start next Saturday." After meeting with Molly, Gary visited with residents on his notepad. A few of them were old enough to remember the last Jesuit priest to come to Hiawatha County and the comet that followed, but most were in too poor of health to care about such things. When he found Nancy's room, it shocked him how much younger the Cranes were than the other residents. Near 60, both were healthy and bronzed, but instead of hiking the deserts of Arizona or walking the beaches of Florida, Wally and Nancy were huddled in a small room overlooking a frozen lake. After an exchange of pleasantries, Wally was swallowed by silence, prompting Gary to ask him, "What's going on in that head?" "Revenge." "How so?" "The doctors say that a blood vessel in her brain plugged up and then, like a balloon, expanded until it just popped. They don't know if the damage it caused her brain will ever get better. She's young and strong, so they try to fill me with hope. But what if it was more than just a blood vessel?" "Why do you say that?" "Right before it happened, oh heck, right as it was happening, she went into this manic rant. Now, I'm reasonable enough to blame the stroke for any strange behavior she was having, but she got angry. The kind of anger usually reserved for me when I track in mud, blood, or grease. I don't think she's ever said a name, but she acted as if an intruder had walked in through the back door. She just started ranting about him ruining everything." "Who was she talking about?" Wally shook his head. "Him? I thought she was revising her manuscript and that it was a character she was imagining. She acts like her characters are real people some days. Again, it could have just been her broken brain, but in the middle of her ranting about him ruining everything, she set a pile of papers on fire, which spread to the curtains and lit the whole damn house. Reality and fantasy came crashing together when she lit that match, and now that broken brain vessel in her brain has become my enemy. I blame it for starting the fire. I blame it for destroying everything. I should have asked her his name, but now I'll get no answers." Both men looked to Nancy, whose closed eyes might never open again. Gary knew what to say when despairing people blamed God, but he didn't know how to respond to Wally's accusations. "Do you need anything?" "The girls are at the house. Packing up what can be saved. They found a small cottage in St. John and are transferring all of the belongings. You could stop by and bring them lunch. Other than that, I don't know what I need." Wally shook his head. "Thanks for stopping by. I just need some rest." Gary patted Wally on the shoulder before leaving the room. A few minutes later, he stood beside the piano. Carson Looning paused when he saw Gary, who updated him on both Lacey Morrison and Nancy Crane. He nodded along as if he was listening to every word, but when Father Gary finished, Carson nodded a few more beats before asking, "You don't suppose she was talking about the Wintermaker?" "Excuse me?" Carson leaned forward to whisper, "Mrs. Crane? The night of the fire? I could hear her on the phone ranting about how he changed everything. What if she was talking about the Wintermaker?" "For what I know, the Wintermaker is asleep and will remain asleep until the Song of the Manitou is sung. It's just that..." "What?" "I'm pretty sure at the exact same time Nancy was having her stroke that I saw Levi McPherson walk into my yard and steal willow branches. If it's not the Wintermaker she was talking about, you don't suppose she was talking about Levi?" "The Cranes have a willow in their yard also." "Do your best to keep Wally from fixating on this. We need him to think rationally in the days to come. I'll speak to Forsberg about this and see what he thinks." As Gary left the nursing home, he almost felt himself stagger back to his car. Is this what I've been called to do? He stopped again and looked out at the frozen lake and wondered who Nancy saw in her final moments of clarity. Chapter 21. Murder Most Foul. Staten Island, New York, January 5th, 1986. Ansel Nielsen had everything he needed for the anniversary of his father's death. The 357 Magnum, Polaroids, porn magazines, guitar picks, a couple cassettes, a book of poetry, some snacks, and enough heroin to kill a horse. Tomorrow, instead of going to school, Prince Hamlet would confront the ghost of his dead father. Ansel propped the backpack between his nightstand and bed before leaving his room to go brush his teeth. He passed the closed door of Tanya's vacant room and stepped into the little bathroom. With his mother and stepfather downstairs, he didn't even bother closing the door to empty his bladder before brushing his teeth. At 14, his skin was the only thing that had gone through puberty, acne speckled on his back, chest, and nose. He brushed so hard his gums bled, and after spitting toothpaste out, he stared at himself. Something is different. He stared at himself for several minutes until only the eyes of his father remained in the mirror. In truth, he didn't remember much of his father. His nightmares of childhood held the faces of Shane and Cindy, and his father only passed through those memories like a shadow. The old house in Indiana had also become just a shadow, with the only details of the nightmare belonging to the basement of the Lewis home. He squinted and then opened his eyes wider. He lifted his mop of hair from his forehead to reveal the landscape of Mars. He splashed hot water in his face, scrubbing his skin until it was as red as the acne. When he stopped scrubbing, he spotted the difference as he removed his hands from his face. At first, his focus remained on the lines in his palms, and then he flipped over his hands to study his knuckles. But 2 feet away, in the inverted world of the mirror, he saw jagged scars running down from his palms all the way to his elbow. The scars only existed on the mirror. When he looked down, his arms were unmolested. When he looked up, his arms belonged to Frankenstein. What the fuck? Having faced plenty of horror in his life, Ansel knew the answer. I'm dreaming. He turned from the open doorway to see his bedroom, where he still slept, and his backpack rested beside the bed. His jaw clenched at the subtle manipulation. He had a new bully in his dreams, one he meant to confront within the dreams. With one step, he was outside of the house, yet still in the same dream. The fowl, with fiery red eyes, perched upon one of the trees in the backyard. For the past 3 months, the raven had been haunting him, prompting his mother to send him back to Dr. Jacobs. Ansel fed his shrink the regular stuff about his childhood trauma as he sorted out the newest twist in his personal melodrama. When he spotted the raven during waking hours, the bird all but ignored him, which brought up concerns about schizophrenia. In his dreams, the blackbird behaved far more aggressively. What do you want? A loop has been closed, the raven said, speaking in the voice of a female, most likely a teenage girl. It wasn't the cute blonde from his dreams or his sister. Nevertheless, the voice resonated with him. So, the fire handle will need your help. I don't care, Ansel said. And no sooner had his voice echoed in the darkness than his arms fell limp, wrist bones exposed and hands dangling awkwardly from tendons still attached to his forearms. Yes, you do, the raven squawked. Tomorrow your choice will either lead you to destruction or to a rekindling of the fire. You must be able to join in the song. What song? The ground underneath his feet began to shake, and he scrambled backwards just as a fissure formed. The crack in the world devoured the ground until he saw another figure being drawn to him. Like himself, the figure was a teenager, dressed in tattered jeans, snakeskin boots, and a felt hat. He stood under a large willow tree, which became the new perch for Ansel's ebony tormentor. If I'm going to do this, the figure said, we'll need your help. Help, the raven repeated. Help, help, help. Between himself and the figure under the raven, the dark waters began to swirl with the passage of a dark serpentine leviathan. As the monster turned in the channel between them, its reptilian back surfaced briefly. Oh shit! Ansel felt something clamp down on his arm, and he tried to spin free to no avail. It shook him. The dream flickered. His eyes opened. The tentacle latched onto his arm, became his mother's hand. "Ansel," she said, "wake up. You're having a dream." The dream was over, and he found himself back in bed without the horned serpent, the raven, or the boy under the willow. "I'm here, Ansel." Disoriented, Ansel looked around his room, and the light came from the hallway where his stepfather stood in the doorway. "We heard you calling for help." "It wasn't me. It was the raven." His mom placed a hand on his cheek ever briefly before her hands withdrew and her back stiffened. "You're safe." Ansel could see in their eyes what they assumed. They think this is about Dad. He took a deep breath, and both the past and the future crept back into the shadows, leaving him in the present. "I'll change my plans for the day," his stepfather said, and slipped back into the hallway. His heavy steps could be heard descending the stairs. "Do you want to talk?" his mother asked, a typical passive-aggressive question for her. He knew she didn't want to talk about her dead husband any more than Ansel wanted to bring up what happened to him and Tanya, and his subconscious mind had apparently called out for help. That fucking raven. It tricked me into making this moment happen. Ansel's heart paused when he realized his mother's legs were practically touching his black backpack beside his bed. If she discovered it, his freshman year would come to an end, and he'd spend the next 5 months in counseling. So he reached out and hugged her. He didn't blubber or cry. He just held her and put his head onto her shoulder. She'd come to the rescue 8 years too late. For now, Ansel put aside his plans to confront his father's ghost. But in his mother's arms, he knew the inevitable was coming. He needed to go to Lake Manitou. Chapter 22, Old Lang Syne. St. John, Minnesota, January 6th, 1986. A blizzard buried Hiawatha County in a foot of snow, making the day even more intolerable than Sheriff Brian Forsberg expected when he woke up. It snowed heaviest in the morning hours, causing school to be canceled and most businesses to close. Rather than sulking in his office, Forsberg spent most of the day patrolling the roads. Eventually, the snow relented, and Forsberg returned to the department. He sat for a few minutes in his Suburban before turning off the engine. The lights of the building created a mirror effect on his windshield, and for a few fleeting moments he stared at the reflection of the stranger looking back at him. When he stepped inside the front doors, he stomped his boots on the doormat to knock off the snow on his boots, but then noticed multiple wet, muddy trails heading in all directions of the station. "How are the roads, Sheriff?" Mia Donaldson asked as she looked up from her typewriter. "It's fine out there now. Plows have cleared it by mid-afternoon." "Good, because I have to drive into Brainerd with Dean tonight, and I hate driving on bad roads." "Highway 10 and 210 will be clear," Forsberg promised as he stepped behind the counter where Mia was stationed. Several of his office staff greeted him, but only received a token nod from him in return. "You have any plans tonight, Sheriff?" "Yeah, I've got a date tonight," Forsberg answered, eyeing his office. He noticed 2 of the 20-something dispatchers suddenly looked up at him in interest, and he glowered back. "Oh, really?" "Yep, got a date with some walleyes. My old buddy Wally Crane told me the walleyes were biting on Lake Manitou. If I hurry, I might get there before it's too late. He tells me they bite at dusk and about midnight. I sure don't want to have to wait around till midnight." All those eavesdropping suddenly went back to work after he disappointed them with his solitary plans for the evening. Satisfied, he walked back to his office and closed the door. He stripped out of his heavy sheriff's jacket and hung it on a coat rack. Next, he unbuttoned his white work shirt and also hung it on the coat rack in the corner. He picked up his favorite red plaid shirt from where he'd hung it in the morning and put it over his insulated long johns. Finally, he removed his gun belt from around his waist, opened his wall safe, and swapped his county-issued gun with his personal weapon, a 1965 Colt Python 357 Magnum. Forsberg quickly slipped the gun into his shoulder harness and sat down at the desk. Since being elected sheriff of Hiawatha County in 1980, Forsberg followed a daily routine of looking at unsolved cases, but today he only needed to look at one file. Nielsen, James Allen, 10/16/48 through 1/6/78. He flipped through all the reports he received from the Whitley County Sheriff's Department in Indiana. He read over the details of the 2 homicides before reading through Jimmy's suicide report again. Then he looked over the evidence files, including the photo of the murder weapon, a 1965 Colt Python 357 Magnum. While on leave in December of 1968, 4 soldiers from J Company of the 11th Armored Cavalry Regiment had purchased 357 Magnums while waiting for their flights in Saigon. Forsberg and his lifetime friend Jimmy Nielsen had bought pistols with mother-of-pearl handles, while Shane Lewis had chosen ivory and Jay Thompson had chosen wood. The pistol that the Whitley Sheriff's Department held in evidence had an ivory handle. Something wasn't right, and he knew one day he was going to have to test all 6 bullets they had in evidence. Forsberg was willing to bet they weren't all fired from the same gun. But it didn't really matter anymore. Jimmy was dead. A tap rapped on his door. Detective Ray Irvin stood in the doorway and peeked around the corner. Irvin had earned the nickname the Reaper for obvious reasons. A slender man with a quiet personality, he often startled people who didn't realize he'd been there for some time. Although only 34, his high brow, thin neck, and taut cheeks made him look like an old man as he quietly peered at situations through his small glasses. Forsberg had hired the gentle soul from Sioux Falls Police Department as a death investigator. Irvin investigated natural deaths and accidents, but occasionally he worked homicides. "I thought I'd heard you," the Reaper said, his eyes flitting around the office. "Do you have a moment?" "Sure," Forsberg said, sliding the Nielsen file aside. "What's up?" "I spent the day making phone calls, and it had been weeks without even learning the name of the 2 victims. The hardware used to build the ice house indicated it was a custom built and not manufactured. The hinges, support pipes, types of wood, even the tarp material, all sold individually. None of the companies I contacted had anything close to ours." "Well, if that don't beat all." "It certainly aligns with your theory, Sheriff. With all the trinkets Disco pulled up from the lake, that Subaru would have had a pretty full rear hatch." "Roof rack?" "Possibly, but it would have been quite a sight. The bottom of the ice house was built with an 8-foot piece of plywood." "You'd need a truck." "And with the testimony of our witnesses, the ice house was set up days before Mr. Cigar parked the Subaru at Haggard Bay," Forsberg reviewed. Without names, Forsberg dubbed the primary suspect Mr. Cigar. The bodies found in the lake were Mr. Dice and Sleepy. Ron Spears and his local dive team found ritualistic paraphernalia, including runic dice. The BCA autopsy results indicated the boy had been drugged and that both men had eaten fast food prior to death. "So is Mr. Cigar local, or does he have an accomplice?" The Reaper shrugged, taking one more glance at Forsberg's desk, cataloging every little detail into his brain for possible use later. Without prompting, the secrets would remain unspoken. Forsberg knew Reaper would not even speculate about the files unless asked. "Nice work, Ray. Keep it up." Once he left, Forsberg looked at the Polaroid he put into a file a few years ago. In the picture, 4 young men posed while holding their new pistols while showing off the 11th ACR Black Horse tattoo they'd just put on their upper arms. Unwilling to cry, Forsberg just grit his teeth together as he tried to understand what had happened to his best friend 8 years earlier. Everyone that knew Jimmy assumed something terrible had happened to him during the Vietnam War, but Forsberg knew the truth. He lost Jimmy to something far worse than war when they were just boys. He'd made a promise to Jimmy to never speak of it, so he swallowed back his emotions and put the file away. There was only one person he could talk to about his feelings. Half an hour later, Sheriff Forsberg stopped at the edge of the highway and shifted his Suburban into four-wheel drive. Unlike most of the other ice fishermen who drove to either Turtle Island State Park or to Chippewa Beach, he knew a shortcut to the frozen lake. He drove off the road, through the cattails, and onto the 2 feet of ice on Lake Manitou. Forsberg parked his Suburban next to the man-made ice house with a tight blue tarp stretched over the pole frame, connected to the wooden base. The lantern inside illuminated the shadow of a solitary figure sitting on a chair. "Anything biting you, old coot?" Forsberg called out to his friend as he closed the door. A 40-inch northern pike stretched out across the ice like a frozen baseball bat. "Of course not," Wally Crane yelled out. "I haven't had a cotton-picking bite all evening." Forsberg turned the wooden handle of the ice house and quickly stepped inside to keep the warm air from escaping. Earl Wally Crane sat with a small jigging pole in his hand, with his stocking feet propped up on a bucket. He leaned over the insulated metal box to see several walleyes already inside. "Damn," Forsberg muttered as he sat down on the seat Wally had prepared for him. "Do you save anything for me?" "I just got that snot rocket earlier today, but I caught those walleyes as soon as the sun went down. You better wet your line, boy." For the next 3 hours, the fishing was good enough to keep Forsberg's mind occupied. When fishing finally slowed around 9 o'clock, he shared a late supper with the man who'd once been his boss. Forsberg drove a propane truck for Wally before getting his law enforcement degree at Central Lakes College. Wally had even been his scoutmaster when he and Jimmy were just kids. If there was anyone who understood what January 6th meant, it was Wally. Instead of Forsberg unburdening his heart, it was Wally who suddenly covered his eyes and began to sob. Wally's hand only stayed at his brow for a few seconds before he quickly wiped his eyes and acted as if nothing had happened. He reached up his line, pulled out the limp minnow, and replaced it with a fresh one. After dropping his line back into the bobber stop, he finally looked up. "I woke up this morning and I didn't know where I was at," Wally explained. "Just like that, everything changed. My wife is gone, my house is gone, and this ice house is the only thing familiar." Forsberg knew all about the details of Nancy's stroke and the fire, but he also knew Nancy was an unofficial part of the Asante Lodge. Despite the medical reports, it still felt like an attack. Golden Shores is the best facility in the area. She'll get round-the-clock care there. Wally was fishing just a few hundred yards from the nursing home. "Yeah, that's what I tell myself. But in the back of my mind, I think back to our wedding vows. I promised I'd take care of her in sickness and in health. I just feel like I let her down." "But you are taking care of her. I know you, Wally. I can't imagine you cooking and cleaning. Bringing her to the professionals is the best bet until she recovers." Forsberg reached into his thick fur-lined bomber jacket and pulled out a flask. He poured a little whiskey into his coffee and then handed it to Wally. Wally poured some in his own thermos cup. "So, what do we drink to?" Wally asked. "How about to Jimmy?" Forsberg finally brought up the other subject they'd all been avoiding that night. Wally raised 3 girls, and without a son, he took to the boys in Troop 88. Rory Stewart, Chris Looning, and Jimmy Nielsen all met tragic deaths, leaving only Brian as Wally's adopted son. A few days ago, Tanya Nielsen's name came across the wire. She's in Chicago. Do I want to know what kind of trouble she's in? Forsberg shook his head. To Jimmy, Wally nodded. And to Nancy. To Old Lang Syne. Forsberg put both pains together into one toast. They both smiled. To memories forgotten, Wally added and drank, smacking his lips and clearing his throat. Did you have a chance to check out Levi McPherson? Forsberg nodded. Against his mother's wishes, Levi has embraced his Indian heritage, which is why he's been visiting Lily on a weekly basis. She's teaching him some of the old ways. When Carson spotted him, the kid was on an errand to collect some branches for a dream catcher. A different heaviness fell between them. Back in 1962, Forsberg and Jimmy Nielsen had been in the same hospital recovering from hypothermia when the shit hit the fan back at Lake Manitou. Lily Guerin, Gavin McPherson, Nicole Guerin, Cameron Guerin, Ed Nielsen, and Wally Crane had all seen evil rise from the lake, and it was their claim that Albert Fisher and Chris Luning had been killed by the dark spirits. Forsberg stewed for several minutes. He'd accumulated too many secrets over the years, but Jimmy Nielsen's secrets weighed most heavily upon him. I know why he ran away, Forsberg began, then totally lost his nerve. They'd only been boys looking for an adventure, but somewhere in the depths of Haggard Bay, the truth waited for him. Huh? I can't be certain why he took his own life. After what he learned and what he did, I don't know how I'd react. But I know why he ran away from Lake Manitou. I was thinking of the flood of '62. I've been doing the same. You and Jimmy were both heroes that day. Forsberg shrugged. We both did what we could do to save folks, and if I have to do it all again, I will do it all again, right? Some days I feel like a real hypocrite. I swore an oath to protect the citizens of this county, but in reality, I'm just a janitor. What do you mean? I just clean up the messes left behind. I lie to myself that I can help these people from the evils in our world. But what if I can't protect them? And if you can't, I don't know who can. Wally took a sip of hot chocolate and handed the thermos to Brian. I'm sure you'll do your part. Just keep a close eye on those kids. Chapter 23. Wawelno? St. John, Minnesota, January 11th, 1986. After another visit to Gigi Lilly, Levi parked his Mustang next to the barn rather than his normal spot in the big machine shed. The lights were on and he could hear his family's instruments warming up. I'm late. He jogged up the carpeted staircase to what had once been a hayloft. Plush carpet panels now acted as sound dampeners. A few years ago, the place was a haven where Levi spent hours learning his craft. Now it was a hell that kept him from musically evolving. Well, Mom declared loudly when Levi appeared, look what the cat dragged in. Levi kept his head down and quickly walked over to his place beside the drum set and quickly slipped the bass guitar around his neck. His mother wore her turtleneck and sequined vest, which meant she intended for a serious practice. And it was. With Christmas season open, Mom had a dozen songs for the band to learn for the next few months. Some were new and contemporary, and others were more traditional. Levi plucked away on the 4 strings of his guitar, totally focused. Joey, however, flitted around the room, playing tambourine beside Daniel for one song and cowbell by Levi for another, strumming an acoustic guitar by Ruben, and singing background vocals on a stool beside Leah. Each time Levi looked at him, Joey gave a nod. Something's happened. After 2 hours, his mother ended practice, sending Ruben with $50 up to go get some pizza for a split rock for the family. Joey immediately came walking up to him, wanting to talk. Hey, bud, can you bring my bass up to my bedroom? I've got to go move my car and bring in stuff that I bought from Brainerd. But I thought... Joey began, but Levi rudely cut him off by walking down the stairs. He also purposely avoided visiting Fozzie in its pen to keep the bird out of his mother's radar. After moving the Mustang, Levi tucked his contraband under his arm and made small talk with the family, which meant a bit of lying about his trip to Brainerd. After running the gauntlet of the kitchen, Levi jogged upstairs. The police were here, Joey said full volume when Levi reached his room. Shit, Levi said, dropping a Sam Goody bag which held a couple cassettes, a magazine, and a dream catcher. Levi had been so focused on smuggling Lily's dream catcher inside that he had not seen Joey waiting in the beanbag chair. You scared me. He quickly picked up his mess and asked, Did he want to see me? What did he look like? He was big with red hair. Forsberg, an ally. And he wanted to see me. He wanted to see Mom, but I heard him talking about you. What did he say? Joey shrugged. What did Grandma Lily say? The Omidai is a vessel. She didn't say too much. About the water drum? What? Levi rushed over to Joey. What did you say? How did you know about the water drum? Fozzie, he told me. He called me Clay and then kept saying the word wobble, wobble, wobble. Instead of waka, waka, waka. Since speaking with Albert about the Omidai, Levi began to fear for his younger brother. How did Fozzie tell you about a water drum? Well, he spoke, and he had others come and talk to me. Other ravens? No, Joey chuckled. Other kids, but they weren't real kids. What do you mean they weren't real kids? Tell me what you saw, Joey. They were kids from the lake. Son of a bitch. You didn't go to the lake, did you? No, they came out of the lake. I stayed on one side of the fence and they talked to me from the woods. Levi felt his heart racing. He thought of Reagan from The Exorcist and Damien from The Omen. Both horror movies featured creepy little kids. Okay, let's get things straight. Don't talk to Fozzie when I'm not around. And definitely don't talk to kids from the lake. It's dangerous, Joey. They want to hurt you. Fozzie says they're friends. Well, don't trust ravens or kids from the lake. Did you tell Mom or Dad about this? Joey shook his head. Well, don't, okay? Lily says if Mom and Dad find out, they'll only make matters worse. What did Lily tell you today? She told me all about the coming fight with the Manitou. She talked about how she had a dream about you and I paddling down the river to help find something. Clay, Joey inserted. No, the Philosopher's Stone, her water drum. Did Fozzie call you Clay? Joey shook his head. The little girl who looked like Summer. Summer? She looked like a girl in my class, Summer Chauvin. Oh, so Fozzie called a ghost to speak to you? Joey nodded. She told me a secret. What secret? I can't talk about it until you go to the right willow tree. The right willow tree? Between Lily and Joey, Levi had crazy coming at him from two directions now. He looked over at his clock and took Joey by the shoulder, leading him to the bookcase along the wall to the unfinished portion of the attic. Sit down. How do I get him to trust me more than the raven? Levi grabbed his Rambo knife that he purchased at the state fair, lying horizontally on top of the shelf of the short bookcase. He picked it up and took it out of its sheath. You know I love you more than anything else in the world, right, Joey? Joey nodded, suddenly filled with fear. Levi held the black blade to his thumb and quickly slid the edge against it. Blood immediately trickled down into his palm. I would rather hurt myself than let anything happen to you. You believe that, right? Joey nodded again. Do you feel the same way about me? Levi asked, followed by another nod. Say it, Joey. I can keep a secret. Give me the knife and I'll prove it. Levi shook his head. I'll keep the knife. Just give me your thumb. Joey bravely stuck out his hand. Levi took his thumb in one hand, and with his big military knife, he pressed the point into Joey's thumb until the skin depressed, and then with a quick flick, cut the thumb, leaving a scratch that slowly filled with blood. This is a blood pact, making us even stronger than regular brothers, right? Right. They held their thumbs together, smearing the blood before releasing. Levi grabbed a sock and handed his brother another. Lily said that when she dies, a monster called the Wintermaker will wake and look for a young person to possess. Before he wakes, 12 lives must be sacrificed. That's what the girl in the red boots said. See, Joe, I worry that they're trying to lure you to the water because our family has special blood. Lily said evil will be drawn to us. So I need to prepare to defeat the Manitou. Lily has a plan for me to learn something called the Song of the Manitou. The Wobble Song, Joey stated. The what? The Wobble Song. Fozzie told me. Why would the Raven tell all this to Joey? He must be the Omadai. I have to protect him from all this. After supper, you're going to have to tell me everything the bird told you. We need to find both the song and something called the water drum. Right. The clay and the rock. No, Joe, a drum is some sort of ancient weapon created by the Wintermaker. But if we learn the Song of the Manitou, we'll use it against him. And then stab him with the spear. No, there is no spear. What about the turtle shield? No shield either. The water drum is a magic weapon, and Lily said you'll help me find it. But first, I have to learn the song. She said she's going to summon the children of the dawn, contact a woman with a smashed face called the Future Spider, and when the time is right, summon the great Thunderbird. Fozzie? No, Fozzie is just a weird raven, Levi admitted with frustration. The great Thunderbird is the enemy of the Wintermaker, and after I sing the song, it will come down from the clouds to destroy the Manitou and send it to the land of the midnight sun. Alaska? No, Joey. Hell. Just listen. He took a deep breath. Now, according to Lily, a lot of people will die if I don't take this seriously and do things exactly as she says. A lot of people are going to die even if I do it right, but I need you to keep all this a secret. Can you do that? Don't talk to anybody about it, okay? A blood pact, Joey repeated and licked the blood from his thumb. Chapter 24, Snow Day. St. John, Minnesota, January 15th, 1986. A second blizzard buried Hiawatha County in a foot of snow, making the highways all but impassable and prompting the Split Rock High School superintendent to cancel school. By mid-morning, Levi climbed on his Polaris snowmobile and followed the railroad tracks that passed through his farm all the way through the town and north toward Nimrod. I'll be safe with Garrett. Garrett Johnson lived on a small farm north of Lake Manitou that once belonged to the Apple family, original settlers and homesteaders. Like himself, Garrett had little interest in farming and dreamed of leaving for bigger and better things upon graduating. Through the whipping winds, Levi spotted a single headlight coming toward him, and when he saw the red of Garrett's Yamaha snow scoot, he stopped on the tracks. Hidden behind his black helmet, Garrett slowed and circled once around him until he pulled up beside him. Ready? Levi extended his thumb with his gloved hand, and Garrett took off in a plume of snow. Just like Levi's father, Garrett Johnson spoke few words during work or play, which was fine by Levi. He chased after his friend, following the old railroad tracks that had been abandoned several years earlier. With the old logging fields in northern Hiawatha County now depleted, the railroad tracks served as a snowmobile trail that extended for miles. After paralleling the Blue Knife River for an hour, the two cut across the bridge at Nimrod and headed west through the ditches to the town of Sabika. The western side of Hiawatha County was flat and open, allowing the wind to create drifts that exploded as the noses of their snowmobiles broke through. The boys reached the town of Wadena in the southwest corner of the county while the blizzard raged around them, having put on nearly 50 miles. Both filled up with gas in Wadena and followed Highway 10 back toward the east. At Staples, the two farm boys turned their sleds back north on the railroad tracks that led to the second largest town in the county, St. John. After almost 3 hours of muted silence, Garrett lifted his visor at the intersection. With the wind limiting visibility to less than 100 feet, Levi could see only a wall of white in front of them. But Garrett said, "I want to show you something." The two followed a drift high enough to allow them to pass right over a fence as they entered a field. A dark shadow turned into a cluster of trees and 4 dilapidated buildings, which had turned gray from the elements. "House fire," Garrett explained, stating the obvious. "They're going to tear it all down this spring. This used to be Sterling Junction. My great-great-grandfather was the county's blacksmith." "So?" "What do you mean, so?" Garrett said indignantly. "These are the remains of the first buildings in the whole county. It's history." "Boring history." Instead of arguing, Levi just cranked the throttle on his Polaris and shot back into the teeth of the blizzard, leaving Garrett behind. He glanced over his shoulder and made sure that the red snowmobile followed as he cut across fields. Blinded by the storm, he had to turn his sled sharply to let momentum and friction aid him from going over a 10-foot drop. A few moments later, Levi joined him on the edge of the little cliff. "I sent a candy," Levi countered Garrett's previous claim several minutes later. "What?" "I sent a candy. It's an Anishinaabe word which means flat rock." "This is Haggard Bay," Garrett insisted. "Before it was a bay, it was a quarry, and before it was a quarry, it was a field of flat rock. My family came all the way from Nova Scotia to settle here almost 2 centuries before your family came here. The Weber family was the first settler family in Hiawatha County." "But they were Indians." So, you are from here?" "So you're from here?" "No, we weren't. We were from Nova Scotia, along the Atlantic Ocean." "Okay then, dumbass. We were the first white family to settle Hiawatha County." "Somehow I doubt that also," Levi jibed just to push Garrett's buttons. Then Levi watched as a cartoon exclamation point all but formed over Garrett's head. "Okay, I'll prove it to you then." "How?" Garrett slammed down his visor and turned his snowmobile around, following the shore to the west a bit until the rocky ridge flattened at a place where the snow hid the boundary of the lake and land. The two entered the deep snow on the extreme western edge of Lake Manitou and then raced across the frozen waters of Haggard Bay. Shaped like an arrowhead, Haggard Bay was a flooded quarry that had joined with Lake Manitou during a flood in the 60s. Only a narrow channel kept it connected to the main lake, and as soon as they passed under the bridge, the vast expanse of Lake Manitou stretched before them. Let's see if Frankie is an honest ghost. Garrett's snow scoot opened up full throttle as he made a beeline across the lake. From Haggard Bay was a mile to the next prominent landmark, Chippewa Point. He stopped in front of the plywood ice house where a green GMC truck, half buried in the drift, was parked beside it. "Grandpa?" Garrett called out as soon as he stood on his slowing snowmobile. Wally Crane flung open the door of the ice house. Levi knew the toughened piece of leather from his childhood as the propane man who delivered fuel weekly to the farm. Despite living his entire life with both Garrett and Wally, he never connected the two. "Hey, look who it is! I thought I'd be the only foolish one enough to be out in this blizzard. I guess the apple doesn't fall far from the old tree, does it?" "Catching anything, Grandpa?" Garrett asked as he pulled off his helmet. Levi followed suit. "Catching anything?" Wally playfully mocked. Dressed in a long john shirt and denim overalls, Wally turned back into his fish house, bent over, and tossed out a big northern pike. "I thought I'd hook the Manitou for a few minutes until I saw this toothy snot rocket coming up the hole." "Wow, that's got to weigh 15 pounds, Grandpa." While Garrett stood over the pike, Wally glanced over at Levi as if trying to remember his name. "You boys enjoying your day off of school, I see. I've got some chicken soup on the propane stove if you'd like some." "That's okay, we ate in Wadena." "Wadena? You boys have put on a lot of miles." "Well, come in for a few minutes and at least warm up." Garrett and Levi were given buckets to sit on that overlooked a hole in the plywood above a hole in the ice that descended more than 2 feet down. A little red and yellow bobber shook as the minnow far below it tried to escape. "You're one of the McPherson boys, aren't you?" "Levi." My grandpa knows everybody in Hiawatha County, don't you, Grandpa?" "I wouldn't go that far. There's a lot more people coming and going these days, as well as a whole lot more people that have moved in since I retired. But I know a good number of folks, including your dad. How's he been?" "Good," Levi added, but found himself at a loss of words since he knew Wally was part of Lily's Asante Lodge. Does Garrett even know about it? "Gavin McPherson's a good man. I miss seeing him on my route." "Yeah, my dad's still a good guy." The wrinkled corners of Wally's eyes tightened as he evaluated Levi like a prize bull at an auction, causing Levi to look down at the bobber drifting around the hole. "Me and Levi went by Sterling Junction a bit ago, and I tried telling him that the Crane family was the first to settle in Hiawatha County, but he didn't believe me." "I didn't say I didn't believe you," Levi corrected. "I said that my mom's side came first. But Indians don't count because they already lived here." Unlike most of the other old-timers, Wally seemed to recoil at his son's crude use of the word Indians. "Your friend Levi has a point. My father, your great-grandfather Kermit, told me that the mound builders lived here thousands of years ago, even before the Dakota. Levi's family, the Mizhike band of Ojibwe, settled here more than 100 years before the first white man put up stakes. Although, if I'm not mistaken, you've got a little Dakota in your blood also." Levi grinned, a bit perplexed. "That's right, but technically it's Lakota. My maternal side is from the Black Hills area." Garrett sighed. "Okay then. My point is that we, the Crane family, were the first white settlers here. What's not clear about that?" Wally raised an eyebrow. "Technically, that might not be true either. While there were fur traders around here as early as the 1600s, I think the Berg family came and put up the first permanent home almost 10 years before the Cranes came, and with a handful of others from the east. Levi, you should ask your grandmother Lily about this." Garrett sighed and surrendered. Levi felt better about the Asante Lodge in the days to come, yet a founder of the Asante Lodge, Albert Fisher, gave him worry about Lily. "How well do you know her?" "I've known her my whole life." "She's well over 100 now." "Yep." Levi wanted to press Wally about his role in the Asante Lodge and added, "She's convinced she won't see another winter, so she's been teaching me the ways of her ancestors." As soon as he said it, he felt a slight betrayal to Lily. "I should probably get going home, actually, or my folks are going to skin me alive." "I suppose," Garrett grumbled. The two stood up from their buckets, and When they opened the plywood door, the diffused light of the blizzard blinded them, even though it was obvious the afternoon was almost spent. "Levi," Wally called out from the door of the fish house, if you're going to head straight home straight across the lake, be sure to avoid Carousel Island. You might not think so, but there is current around the island that sometimes keeps the ice thin even in the coldest winters." "Sure," Levi said with a shrug as he backed onto his snowmobile. With a nod, Garrett cut a path to the north while Levi aimed to the east. With 6 miles of ice in front of him, Levi managed to get his Polaris up to 60 miles an hour, making Turtle Island Bible Camp and empty ice houses pass by in a blur. But the tangle of dead trees and rusting steel that was Carousel Island proved the fastest and most direct route back home to his farm. All along the southern shore, a thick forest of oak trees along Old Copper Road would have forced him into a ponderously slow end to his trip. Racing around Deadwood Island meant then hit past the reeds of Buffalo Slough, which would allow him to pop right onto the gravel road that went right by his farm. Levi thought of the 2 to 3 feet of ice below the bobber and ignored Wally Crane's warning. Even 2 decades after the catastrophic flood, the old roller coaster tracks could still be seen leaving the lake shore and again appearing on the southern shore of the island, where trees hid most of the rest of the old skeleton. Levi slowed. In the dimming light of early evening, his headlight caught an irregularity in the ice. Slowing to a halt, he spotted a buckle in the ice a dozen yards from the edge of the shore. The blowing snow had almost covered it, but he could see a 2-foot ridge where sheets of ice cracked and shattered like a fault line. But the old man had been wrong about the thin ice. From what Levi could see, the jagged fault had been formed by broken pieces of ice well over a foot thick. It only took several inches of ice to support his sled. Even though Carousel Island was less than a quarter of a mile from his farm, he'd never been near the island before. He knew some of the upperclassmen partied on the island despite the futile warnings of the numerous no trespassing signs. Levi also never enjoyed fishing or boating, so until now he'd never been close to the abandoned amusement park. If not for the ridge of ice that acted like a defensive wall, he would have taken a quick tour along the shore. The backside of the island, however, near Buffalo Slough, would have much shallower water, so he reckoned if he went around the buckle, he might still be able to take a peek. The blizzard strengthened and a gust of wind stole his curiosity. As his hand gripped the throttle, the ridge of ice seemed to move in the blowing snow. The snow that whipped around the frozen upheavals spun into strange funnels that almost took shape. And then a gray figure took a step out of the ice. At first, Levi thought he was staring at a pack of wolves instead of a ridge of ice. He'd heard stories about buffaloes and cows that would line up their tails to the blizzard, and as the ridge of ice came to life, he thought he might have driven up on some sort of similar situation. The creatures did not move like dogs or wolf, nor did they have slender bodies. They moved like ice-encrusted raccoons or porcupines, but instead of walking on all fours, they seemed to waddle like bushy gnomes. Beady eyes penetrated the blizzard. Levi had seen enough. He gunned the Polaris, which lurched and stalled. In a panic, he turned the key. As soon as the engine turned over and started, he gunned it. Again, the sled lurched and stalled. The eyes advanced. "Son of a bitch," Levi muttered as he turned the key again. His faithful motor started again, but before he gunned it, he noticed the tracks of his Polaris had been swallowed by ice. He'd only been parked for a minute at the most, but the ice had climbed up and over the track to freeze his sled to the surface of the lake. This time, instead of gunning it, he gently twisted the throttle, allowing the RPMs to steadily climb and build strength. The engine died again, Shit! Levi glanced up. The strange creatures, blanketed in the blizzard, now stood less than 10 yards away. You cannot cross the threshold, the creatures spoke in unison. It was agreed. And you cannot leave this island. Levi jumped as a young girl shouted from beside him. He almost fell from the sled as he saw a schoolgirl dressed in a yellow rain jacket, plaid skirt, white socks that climbed up to her knees, and red galoshes. Despite the fact that a blizzard surrounded Levi, the little girl seemed to feel no effect. The gray creatures paused. The little girl stepped forward. Leave him alone, or I'll call for Grandmother Spider to come and cast you into the abyss. Go back to your home. With a swirl of snow, the gray creatures vanished, taking even the ridge of ice with them. The little girl turned back around to look at Levi before she also vanished into the wind. Levi turned the key, and the tracks effortlessly pushed his sled forward. He turned back toward the southern shore, choosing Old Copper Road over the uncertainty of continuing near Carousel Island. Frankie Auerbach spoke the truth. Chapter 25, The Caged Bird Sings, Old Copper Road, January 15th, 1986. It's real. Everything Lily told me is real. Levi tried to ignore what he'd seen but couldn't, so he immediately went to the machine shed when he returned home. Something wrong? His dad called out from the doorway. Metallica blared from the speakers in his Mustang, limiting Levi's response to a small flinch at the unexpected voice. A lot is wrong, Dad. I'm either insane or cursed, Levi thought from the nose of the Mustang. Levi sat on the rolling stool, feet propped up on the bumper. I'm just changing oil and draining the radiator fluid. I hope you're not planning on going anywhere tomorrow. It's supposed to stop snowing but start blowing. No, I was just making sure the old girl is ready for winter. I might go visit Grandma Lily on the Sunday after church. Really? Well, that would be nice of you, Gavin said, beginning to tidy up his workbench. There's a lot of history you don't know about between your mom and Lily. Don't say anything to your mother, okay? A lot of history? What isn't he telling me? How'd the sled run today? It ran great for most of the day, but when I stopped once, it stalled and wouldn't get going. You know, because Tok Pai came up from the ice to kill me. Lily talked about the little men of the forest, which her clan called Tok Pai. Levi tried to look up information on it, but only found references to Pukwudgies and Memagwisi in a few books. Stalled? Suddenly his father had a challenge, and like a knight of the round table, took up arms to vanquish his foe for the honor of the realm. The machine shed held more toys than farm equipment. There were a few tractors and mowers on the far side near the barn, but it also held the Brown Beast, an RV, and a fleet of snowmobiles, including a few old ones that were now collector's items. Levi had already parked his Polaris in its proper spot. Gavin had the hood up in seconds. So it would not start, or did it sputter? You see, Pop, while I was checking out Carousel Island to see if Lily's stories were true, the gray demons ambushed me and used their magic to melt the ice so that the tracks got stuck. It was more of a stalling issue. It started fine. There were 12 creatures, just like in the tales, but only 3 of them came out onto the ice. The other 9 seemed bound to the island. It could be old gas or the fuel filter, Gavin muttered behind the hood, or black magic. If it had not been for the spirit of the little girl with red galoshes, he might have been killed by the 3 gray monsters. 3 deaths, 3 grown strong. I don't think it's bad fuel. We filled up in Wadena before we had lunch. Wadena? You boys put on some miles today. Did you turn off the engine at all after you filled up? Yeah, we stopped by Wally Crane's ice house. and warmed up for a few minutes. Wally caught a big northern. Only Wally would you be out fishing in a blizzard. How is the old coot? How does Dad know Wally? Fine, Levi said, closing the hood of his Mustang. And said he thought he'd hooked the Manitou. Why don't you talk about the Manitou, Dad? Levi turned the key off, and silence filled the shed. He put everything away while his father continued to work on the snowmobile. I was attacked, Dad, and the only one who came to my aid was a dead girl. Where were you or Mom? Why is Lily the only one helping me? Well, your spark plugs were a bit fouled, so that might have caused it. Next time you take it out, keep it local, at least until we can put new ones in. Yeah, right, like I'm going to go out again after what happened. Okay. Things going okay at school? You seem quiet lately. Of course, school's cool. Girl troubles? Thankfully, no. No more problems with Christy? No, we just look the other way when we see each other. The hostility is over. Their conversation was enough to put Levi at ease, and even though Levi felt trapped between a rock and a hard place, he felt a bit more relaxed. So he helped his father out, put the Polaris back together, and then walked with him back into the house. He sat on the couch with his family as they watched Mr. Belvedere, but when Falcon Crest came on, Levi used his excuse to leave. Make sure Joey has brushed his teeth for bed, Mom said. I'll come up next commercial break and tuck him in. Joey was playing on the floor of his room, yet immediately stopped and turned to look at Levi when he entered the room. You okay? I had a bad day, Levi admitted, but gave him a thumbs up, which took on a whole new meaning with their shared blood brother scars. I'll talk about it tomorrow. Mom says you need to go brush your teeth for bed. Without waiting for a response, Levi walked past and jogged up the stairs to his room. On the other side of the room, the raven-feathered dream catcher was silent. Lily warned me about it, just like Wally warned me about Carousel Island. Why didn't I listen? Now, the web of the dream catcher was empty, but during the snowstorm, it had been full. He walked over to the plexiglass window and ripped the dream catcher down, twisting the willow branch until it snapped and cracked. He doubled it up again, snapping all the branches in half, even if the thin parts held the branches together. He ripped the feathers from their leather bands and carried the mangled mess over to the garbage can, where the Sam goodie bag still rested. Lily's magic worked with mixed results. As she had warned, her magic would do more than just ward off bad dreams. As a fire handler, her dream catchers would catch the spirits of the dead that lingered around Lake Manitou, trapped by the Wintermaker. Just like fishing, it took a while before anything took the bait, but the moisture of the snowstorm drew out a soul by the name of Frankie Auerbach. Would you like to hear how the Manitou killed me? Frankie had asked just the night before. And then the spirit of the schoolboy told a harrowing tale of how he'd been lured into the tall grass of the wild rice fields by frogs, only to be drowned by the water spirits, the Tokpai. Through the web of the dream catcher, Frankie confirmed the Tokpai needed death to bring them back to full strength, and that once the 12 spirits were ready, they would aid in the resurrection of their master. Young Frankie Auerbach had even known Lily as his Sunday school teacher, vouching for her from beyond the grave. In death, he'd been a witness to her confrontation with the Manitou back in 1898. The island, Frankie explained. The Tokpai are trapped on the island. Go see for yourself. It's all true. Levi had listened, using the snow day as a passive excuse to go investigate, yet it had almost cost him his life. Everything started the night that damn raven flew through my window, Levi decided, and shoved the dream catcher into the Sam goodie bag. It's like Frankie knew what would happen. He picked up the whole trash can and walked down the stairs. In the hallway, there was suddenly a traffic jam. Joey stood in the doorway of the bathroom brushing his teeth, and his mother had just reached the second floor. "Could you take the trash in the kitchen too?" she requested, glancing at the contents of the can as he walked by. Gladly, he decided. Taking out the trash meant a trip to the burn barrel, set a few yards from the floodlight in the middle of the gravel lot. Normally, any of the McPherson boys would grumble when given the task, but Levi was on a mission, so he grabbed the kerosene can and matches and took both bags of trash out to the 55-gallon drum. "Fire!" Fozzie screamed from the barn. "Fire! Fire!" A bad omen indeed. Soon, the kitchen garbage, along with other trash already in the can, blazed until flames danced above the top of the barrel. The Sam Goody bag was tossed on the pyre and quickly vanished. Just one last thing to make things right. "Which old witch? Wicked witch," Fozzie sang out as Levi neared the barn. The paranormal qualities of the bird could not be denied. Levi had long ago given up on the idea that the bird had just been trained to repeat words, and he wondered if the raven could be trusted. "Sorry, Fozzie. I don't have a choice. It's either you or Lily." Once inside the main barn, he did not walk over to the pen, but instead turned to the hayloft, opened a door to the cattle area, and then climbed up onto the hay, opening a wooden window that overlooked the roof of the skirting. "We all have choices, Fozzie." "Under the willow," Fozzie shouted out, as if desperate. "Willow! Willow!" "Yeah, I know all about the fire in the willow, and I'm the only one listening from now on. Only one I'm listening to from now on are real people. No more ghost boys, dead girls, or talking ravens." Fozzie eyed him suspiciously and did not move. For a moment, Levi felt a bit intimidated by the black creature in the dim light of the barn. "Shoo!" he said, and flapped his arms. He stepped forward toward the bird, and it jumped sideways. With Levi following it, the bird crashed into the wire and fell into the floor. But when he saw the open door of the pen, it quickly hopped toward the opportunity. "Shoo!" Levi said, and rushed at the bird. This time, Fozzie flew a few strides before its wings flapped in the hallway, and once it came out from under the wooden roof to open the side of the loft, it launched itself in the air, landing atop the haystack. "Go on," Levi said. "You're free. Go back to where you came from." "Willow," Fozzie croaked, and then Levi climbed up the bales. The raven spread its wings and crossed the loft to the far wall, perching at the open window. One last time, it called out, "Fire!" and then flew out the barn window. By the time Levi reached the window, the raven had vanished into the night sky. He left the window slightly ajar, and then went down to close the doors to the cows. Going back to the pen, he left the door a few inches ajar and walked back to the house. Crying is better than dying, Levi told himself as he thought of what Joey's reaction would be likely in the next morning. Chapter 26, A Foundation of Murder. St. John, Minnesota, January 20th, 1986. As Sheriff Brian Forsberg drove by Haggard Bay, he saw the yellow police tape fluttering in the wind. He parked along the highway and looked over the ice-covered bay. Almost 3 months had passed since the murders, and the identities of Mr. Dice, Sleepy, or Mr. Cigar were still not known. The only lead was a dead end. On the other side of the police tape, a dozen custom-built ice houses dotted the main body of Lake Manitou. The police tape had been meant to keep folks out of an active crime scene, but either the wind or passerbys had left the perimeter looking like the tassels on a bike handlebar. He swallowed down his last bit of coffee and began buttoning up his heavy jacket. He grabbed his trapper cap and, from the passenger seat, lowered the fur-lined ear flaps and snapped them under his chin. One more look. At the bridge, Forsberg jerked the poles used to secure the police tape from the frozen ground. One of his deputies had been assigned the duty back in November. Some poles teetered and others sunk into 6 inches of ice. With a little prying back and forth, the poles were freed and carried under his left arm. The dark legacy of Haggard Bay only grew in reputation with the unsolved murders. Even before the settlers arrived, foul tales were told. And now it has become my problem. The comet will return in just 3 months. Forsberg found himself at the extreme western side of the bay, where Mr. Cigar had parked his Subaru. Spring would soon destroy any surviving evidence, just like it had 26 years ago. On Labor Day of 1961, Jimmy Nielsen and Rory Stewart snuck into the active and operational Haggard Quarry. With only a fence protecting its secrets, the trio managed to reach all the way to the quarry floor before the floodlights turned on and armed security guards came looking for them. At the time, it seemed fortunate that Brian's uncle, Ewan, owned the quarry, which allowed them to be released without any consequences. Why the fuck would a quarry have armed guards? Forsberg wondered again as he began retrieving poles from the western side of the bay. Jimmy had a theory, but it was one he'd only spoken once. Although the security guards had easily caught Forsberg and Stewart, Jimmy hid himself in a side tunnel where he claimed to feel something beyond. While child molester and serial killer Logan Truce resided in St. Louis at the time, Forsberg stood in the tent office of Red Doby, manager of Haggard Quarry, who took note of the 2 adolescent intruders. A month later, Rory Stewart became Logan Truce's second confirmed victim, and against all odds, Truce chose Forsberg as his third. Sheriff Don Betzing noticed the discrepancies, but when the flood of 1962 came, bringing the collapse of the Nicollet Dam, Lake Manitou reached out and covered up multiple crimes. Forsberg found himself staring at a house where the quarry office had been. Instead of a crushed quartz ramp, gate, and cheap modular home, the shorefront property had an asphalt driveway, a dozen planted pines, a boathouse garage, and a ranch house with a southern wall built mostly of windows, replete with a figure staring back at him. Forsberg jerked the northernmost pole from the ground and dropped his armful of poles onto the ground so he could rearrange the heavy stack. By the time he finished getting all the poles turned around into an easy-to-carry bundle, the figure in the window stood on his patio, still holding a large mug. "No longer a crime scene?" the property owner called out. "It will always be a crime scene. I should just erect permanent poles along the shore." In 1972, a decade after the flood, Forsberg and Wally Crane had been duck hunting along the cattails of Haggard Bay when they discovered an oil slick upon the water. A local teen drove his car off the road and right into the bay. Divers discovered his body a few days later. Forsberg, a servant of the people, walked to the edge of the shore where a snowbank blurred the edge of the water. "Sorry for the inconvenience, but we had to let the investigation run its course. So we can drive snowmobiles through the channel and right out in the main part of the lake?" Lieutenant Harper and Detective Irvin both interviewed Miles Stewart, the sole property owner who could have witnessed anything suspicious. Forsberg glanced at the large boathouse along the shore. "Yes, you can." "Have you had any breaks in the case? Do they know more about the victims or who did this?" Miles Stewart had reason for his interest, which everyone else dismissed since it was the older brother Rory who had been killed by Logan Truce. "We've collected all the evidence, and now we just need to follow where it takes us. Let's have coffee sometime before hunting season sneaks up on us again." Forsberg nodded and turned, even though Sheriff Don Betzing never reconciled the differences in the pitchfork wounds between Chris Looting and Logan Truce. 13-year-old Biff knew the face behind the mask even before he threw the pitchfork and saved his friend's life. Red Doby. The quarryman had worked his whole life for Triton Corporation. Red was a manager of the Haggard Quarry, and his father, Halvar Doby, worked at the Nicollet Dam, which regulated water flow for the logging companies owned by Triton. While the world gobbled up a story about a young homosexual killing 3 local boys, Biff Forsberg knew Red Doby targeted him for trespassing into the quarry. The odds of both witnesses becoming victims of the same serial killer was astronomical. Plus, Jimmy Nielsen warned him of certain doom. If not for Jimmy, Chris Looning would have stayed overnight with Biff, who had been alone in the barn when the killer came to abduct him. What had Jimmy found in that tunnel? Forsberg turned back to Stewart. Call the office sometime. He bent over and picked up the poles, carrying them under his left arm. He gave Miles Stewart a friendly wave before heading back to his prowler. He couldn't fight horned serpents, tokpai, ghosts, or anything else that went bump in the night. He could, however, fight the Order of Eos, which predated the settlement of Hiawatha County. With roots in the same mythology that led Hitler to seek out pure Aryan blood, the Order of Eos remained invisible puppet masters trying to bring a fulfillment of their prophecies. Every death in and around Lake Manitou needed proper investigation, even the damn nursing home which allowed souls to be fed to the lake without question. Miles isn't in the Order of Eos. The Stewart, Haggard, and Marquette forefathers might have once been part of the secret society, but their strings had been cut for a while. Mr. Dice and Sleepy came from outside Hiawatha County. Framing poor Miles would help eliminate loose ends. After tossing the poles in the back end, Forsberg sat in his seat for a moment, studying the lesser Stewart estate for a few minutes longer, picturing a man opening the boathouse and dragging it out onto the ice where Mr. Dice and Sleepy were killed. Or it could be the Phantom in the Red Thunderbird, Brian thought and shrugged. After all, Red Dobie had been one of the flood victims too, killed while trying to save Nicollet Dam from collapse, if any of it could be believed. Chapter 27, The Missionary, Wadena, Minnesota, January 21st, 1986. Father Gary McKenzie withheld one detail from the breakfast briefing with Wally Crane, Chuck Looning, and Sheriff Forsberg. A private confession from Levi McPherson. He chewed on his conscience as Forsberg finished his breakfast. Wally had given an update on his wife Nancy, whose stroke changed Wally as quickly as it had changed her. Forsberg spoke about private investigators at Mount Shasta, California, and Nova Scotia, but his point didn't make any sense. Mayor Chuck Looning talked about his concerns with spring flooding affecting the town of Split Rock. With a full meeting of the Asante Lodge in February, Gary kept his concerns to himself, choosing instead to talk about the little victories in his life. He left the Boondocks Cafe without making any confessions himself. I only make this confession to one man. Half an hour later, he parked his small Chevette beside the snow pile at the T intersection of the Mesquite Band of Ojibwe Reservation. The paved road from the highway turned north at the intersection toward the reservation, and the plow drivers simply pushed their way as far into the ditch as they could, creating a way between the road and the Blue Knife River. Although there was a gravel road leading south, it had not been plowed like the other two roads, and the Chevette had the official clearance of a bare ankle. So he walked. Despite the depth of the snow around him and the ill-treated gravel road, it felt as if spring had arrived as Father Gary delicately plodded down the road. I should have brought snowshoes instead of boots. Over the past 14 years, he'd only been to the reservation a handful of times, yet he had taken youth groups to do service projects at Pine Ridge, White Earth, Red Lake, and Turtle Mountain. Wally's memory and directions served him well. The details about looking for chimney smoke helped when the road seemed to vanish for a few occasions. Oh, dear Lord, he chooses to live like this? In a clearing, an old structure no larger than a garden shed or chicken coop sent smoke up from a simple tin pipe into the air. A covered deck as large as the home itself extended toward the river, holding suspended relics, artifacts, and knickknacks like a man-made spiderweb. After hundreds of yards of untouched snow, the area around the shack was cleared and had signs of recent activity. In the front yard, a small rock fire pit fed with bark and shavings, smoked. Megisi Asabakashi stood in front of the pit, axe in hand. Wiry white hair twisted in opposition to order, creating 3 patterns of tufts. He wore a tan jacket with a fur lining appearing at the hood, hands, and along the bottom, which almost reached toward his knees. Wait, he's wearing a buffalo hide flipped inside out. Under it, he had a red and black flannel shirt, denim overalls, and a bright blue pair of moon boots. Father Gary watched as the old Ojibwe elder picked up a quartered log, set it on a flat stump, and then lifted the axe to his shoulder and swung with no greater force than what gravity provided. A thin splinter came off the log before it toppled off the stump, and Megisi prepared for another swing. "Good morning," Father Gary said. "Mino Gigesheb." Megisi turned, axe still in hand. Father Gary knew what the old man saw. His universal calling card, his priestly collar, revealed under his jacket. Wally and Forsberg debated if Megisi had yet turned 100, but seeing him face to face, Father Gary wondered if he might be 200. With enough wrinkles, dark splotches, and growths upon his bulbous nose to make a dermatologist's fate, Megisi was the human equivalent to a leather farm glove. "You've finally returned," Megisi said, "even though you now wear another face. Finish chopping this wood into kindling, and then we can talk." Still an athlete, Father Gary tore into the pile of wood, first sending splinters everywhere, but after several logs, developed an efficient strategy for quartering the timber. Megisi returned from the shack with 2 mugs of steaming beverage and called out, "Come." He joined Megisi on the porch, accepted the warm cup, and sat down. The beverage was neither coffee nor cocoa, and flakes of pink and purple floated in the dark brew. "Just so you know, the young boy in my heart would have poisoned your cup, but luckily I have learned to tolerate my enemies in my old age." "I am not your enemy, Megisi," Father Gary said. "I am your ally. What does a white man, especially a Christian, know of my conflict? Who do you think I am?" "This certainly isn't going well." "I'm here to learn. I am hopeful we can be allies. For what little I know we'll need each other in the days to come, especially with the coming of the comet. They tell me my sister will die soon." "Yes, which makes you our last link to the past. I've come to learn." "Yet you presume to be my ally already, coming to me with your collar and black clothes. You will mock my beliefs and turn their meanings to become what you want them to mean. You are not the first priest wanting to be my friend." "You refer to Father Garin?" "I saw him die," Megisi said, and turned to look at him. "He was not much farther away than you are to me now. The lawman called Bushy Bill Morrison shot him in the back, killed 2 more men, and then shot him a second time through the heart. Your Christian God did not save him a second time. Your Christian God did not save him. My brother-in-law died in the sand. He also left me to my fate. Why should I want a weaker version of Father Garin as my ally?" "Oh, I'm not a warrior like Father Garin. From what I've read, he fueled 3 armed uprisings during his life, resulting in many, many deaths. Like Garin, I have seen war, but never have I lifted a weapon, nor do I come to you with a weapon, or ever plan to carry one. I am not a warrior. The only thing I can offer is the cup of life." "Blasphemy," Megisi muttered. "Heretic. When I was a boy, the nuns used those words whenever I would try to defend myself." "Do you know what the Church of Christ did to Indian boys like me? They would tear us from our homes and bring us hundreds of miles from home, cut our hair, force us to wear strange clothes, and forbid us from speaking our own language. When I see priests, I want to throw up. Yet you offer the cup of life?" Gary remained calm. I cannot answer for what happened in the past. Then why are you here now if not to apologize? I need your help in the days to come. My sister was taken to one of the schools, and she returned as a Christian, rejecting everything about who she was. I refused and stayed in the woods to remain in the ways of my ancestors. Then one day, with the promise of candy, she led me into town, where white men grabbed me from the streets and sent me away, stealing my destiny. What was your destiny? I unearthed the Migi shells in the mud and brought them to my grandfather, Nanakonan. It was a sign, and I was to be trained not just as a Mide, but as a Wabano, a fire handler. It was my destiny to fight the horned serpent and to call down the great thunderbird to destroy it. My sister stole all this from me when she led me into town like a lamb to slaughter. Beware of my sister's plans, for they serve no one but herself. I want to talk about your sister. With the return of the Serpent Star in April, we've been busy preparing ourselves for the rituals. Now, I've reconciled myself to the idea that reality will fall somewhere between the Catholic rite of exorcism and the juggler ceremony of the Jessicate. It doesn't matter what names we use for our enemy. I am ready to do my part. So am I. Everyone is preparing, but it seems Lily has her own agenda. She's recently fostered a relationship with her great-grandson Levi and has gone through great lengths to teach him the ancient ways. Recently, she's opened his eyes to the evil that sleeps under Lake Manitou. Magisi's eyes narrowed with anger. It was supposed to be me. When the Ouijigan elders learned that I had found the sacred Migi shells here at Lake Manitou, they believed I was the one to fulfill the prophecy. And what prophecy is that? You won't find it written in the books. In his battle with the Creator, the Wintermaker shaped the water drum, wrote the Song of the Manitou, and crafted the prophecy that he placed inside of the sacred shell. When the Wintermaker learned of the doom of mankind, he both embraced the prophecy and made plans to destroy it. He submitted to the fate of his own death, allowing himself to be killed and buried here at Lake Manitou. By the time his heart stopped beating, his plan was already underway. His soul remains trapped here, Gary added. How do you know this? The Ouijigan clan can trace itself back to the reception of the 7 fires given to us when we lived along the shores of the Atlantic. Even though the people tried to cast us from society, our old legends did not die. In his excitement, Nanakonan reached out to the remnants of the Ouijigan clan to tell them about the discovery of Migi shells here at Lake Manitou, not understanding how they intended to fulfill the prophecy, the Omadai. Albert Fisher wrote of the Omadai, Gary commented. For the Wintermaker to win, he must cheat death. He's partially achieved his victory over the Creator by creating a place that does not allow souls to journey to the next world. His ultimate victory, though, is to rise from his own death and walk the earth again in human form. Father Garin said your religious texts speak of such a figure. The Antichrist, Gary said softly. The Bible verse from Revelation 13 came to mind. I saw one of the heads as if they had been fatally wounded, and his fatal wound was healed. And the whole earth was amazed and followed the beast. My life was not in danger, for the Ouijigan did not intend to harm a hair on my head. No, it was my soul that was in danger. Omadai is a word for vessel, and that is almost what I became, an empty container for the Wintermaker to possess. The Black Robes sent Father Garin as a spy amongst us, and when the moment happened, he saved my life. Or did he crush the prophecy like an egg? You come to me with the face of friendship, but when the moment comes around again, will you squash the prophecy? If this prophecy indeed involves the ascension of the Antichrist, then don't answer. Put it to prayer, Father Mackenzie. Unlike the predestination found in your Christian prophecy, the seven fires prophecy is not so absolute. One choice will result in destruction. The other choice will result in a renewal of life. When Father Guerin squeezed the trigger to save my life, was he a hero or villain? That answer remains to be seen. Gary had read about many of those concepts, but he knew little about the Omadai. Does Lily believe Levi is the Omadai? Lily made her choice decades ago, and now we must pray it was the right choice. If there's a reason I did not take a wife and produce children. If it came down to it, could I give up my own child to save the world? Give up a child? Hold on, what do you mean by that? Bah, Lily's plan is not to sacrifice her own family, but there is a reason why Fontreville took her family as far away from Lake Manitou as she could. Lily is not afraid of the Wintermaker, and if her path is righteous, she will use her family as bait for the Wintermaker. She'll draw up the horned serpent from the depths, and when the moment is right, the great Thunderbird will strike him from high and cast his soul into Jibbe-Zibi, the river of souls. Levi is bait for a trap? Does that put your mind at ease? McGeesy asked. Not really. She's preparing him for his part in the coming ritual, Gary recapped. For his role as the Omadai? McGeesy shook his head. The fewer people who know, the better. The boy's parents were witness to what happened in 1962, so they must have their suspicions. It is best to keep them ignorant about the plans of the Asante Lodge. Despite my misgivings, I've learned it is the easier option to trust in the plan, even if it puts the boy at risk. What's the other option? My sister has doomed us all. Chapter 28, Sleep No More. Old Copper Road, January 21st, 1986. Levi McPherson pulled the covers over his head and scooted in the crease between the bed and the wall. Something climbed onto the roof outside. The noises continued in a steady crunch of compressed snow. It's getting closer. Squeezing his eyes shut, he tried not to think of the beady eyes of the porcupine men or their long fingers, but instead, a green, slimy tentacle materialized in his mind. It reached out from the lake, through the woods, and now pried at the weak plexiglass of the repaired window. If I scream, will it kill my family, or will it just snatch me from my bed and drag me to the lake? Something now moved across the floor. Did the horned serpent blindly feel around for him? He pictured the suction cups of an octopus individually feeling the contents of his room, sweeping aside his old cars or G.I. Joe action figures. If the Wintermaker sent out only a tentacle to claim him, then it was blind, and Levi kept so still that he did not even make a breath. His stereo and alarm clock created just enough modern illumination to show the truth. Joey. His little brother had crawled up the stairs, still wearing his blanket. Are you awake? Yes, Joe, I'm awake. In a full scamper, Joey threw himself onto the outer edge of his bed, and for a few minutes, the two brothers sat quietly together. His brother held on to a plastic action figure of He-Man. I owe him the truth of what happened last night. I've seen the little girl, Levi admitted. The one who spoke to you? You have? What did she want? She said she couldn't sleep because her soul was trapped in the waters of Lake Manitou. She said I have an important part to play to help free the soul stuck here. She called me the Trickster. Silly rabbit tricks her kids, Joey said and looked to Levi for approval. When he didn't laugh, he asked, What's wrong? I think I might have made a big mistake. Do you know how Fozzie managed to escape his pen? 'Cause he's smart? No, Joe. I opened the doors and chased him out of the barn. I watched him fly off. Joey's face wrinkled with anger. Why would you do that? Something bad is going to happen. I wanted to do everything I could to keep you safe. But Fozzie was our friend. I thought he was trying to lure you down to the lake to join the others. When I heard you talking about ghosts by the lake, I panicked. I'm sorry, Joe. I shouldn't have done it, or let you think it was your fault somehow. It's okay. Joey's glare softened. What are you going to do? Gigi Lily's plan is to use the Wintermaker's magic against it. She's teaching me the Song of the Manitou so I can use the magic against it when it's vulnerable. Like a sneak attack. Exactly. The Wintermaker thinks that when Gigi Lily dies, it will be free to do whatever it wants. But by that time, I'm going to know how to use the water drum. The servants of the Wintermaker can't fully wake their master without it, and I'm only going to know how to use it. Only I'm going to know how to use it. What's a water drum? Some sort of secret weapon. You're going to help me find it, apparently. Lily had a dream about it, and she says you'll find it for certain. But I don't know where it is. Will Joey become a victim like Mikisi? Do I have to put him in danger to win? I guess it doesn't matter. You will find it. The destiny of the Wintermaker is to be destroyed by a boy who tricks it. You and we're going to trick it. It's going to wake up and find the two of us holding its favorite toy. Is the water drum an actual drum? Joey asked. No, when it's inert, it is... What's inert mean? When it's off. When it's off, it is cold and shrinks up like a big rock. But when the Song of the Manitou is sung, it transforms into something like liquid fire. Like a lightsaber? Joey said, a little awed. I heard you sneak in last night. Where were you? Do I tell him about Lacey? I was at a party. You're not the only one who I'm worried about protecting, Joe. There's a lot of folks, especially young people, who are in danger from the servants of the Wintermaker. The last 2 times somebody tried to wake the Wintermaker, a bunch of folks died. Why would someone want to wake the Wintermaker? I don't know, Joe, but I'm trying to figure that part out as well. But I'm running out of time. Because Gigi Lily's dying? Yes, that, and it's getting warmer. Lily says they will try to wake the Wintermaker during Midsummer's Eve. When's that? Before I tell him more, I need to find that willow tree. June 20th. But remember, I'm the trickster, so we're going to catch them off guard before they are ready. While they're sleeping. Right, while they're sleeping. Go watch cartoons or something and let me sleep. Don't tell Mom I snuck in, okay? Joey held tight onto Levi's He-Man action figure. I promise. Chapter 29, Perihelion, Old Copper Road, February 7th, 1986. Carson Looning began his long goodbye at 3 p.m. His afternoons were spent in the main hall. Today had been cards, which he gathered up and put away. He talked shit with the old-timers, promising rematches on Monday. First, he rolled into a private room and pushed the nurse button. After a shift where he pretended to be charming and vibrant, his mood darkened when confronted with his reality. Paraplegia. A deer slug destroyed his L1 vertebrae, leaving him without control of his legs, bowel, and bladder. Pearl Smith, the oldest and ugliest of the nurses, earned the honors of helping him through the humiliation of rectal stimulation and changing his catheter for the weekend. Even though little was said between the two during the half-hour ordeal, she received floral arrangements for her birthday, anniversary, and major holidays. His second stop meant visiting the main office, where Molly Chauvin played the game of what could have been with him. At a Halloween party hosted by Miles Stewart in the fall of 1972, Carson lost his virginity to Molly in the boathouse. 9 months later, Molly had married her college boyfriend, Mark Chauvin. Carson was paralyzed, and newborn Penelope Chauvin was none the wiser. C'est la vie, Carson thought with a shrug. Do you know what I was thinking of? Molly Chauvin asked him after pausing from her paperwork when he entered the office. I had a dream about Leah Kaufman. Oh shit, what prompted that? Carson asked. A fox ran across the road on my way home the other day. The dead fox in the locker. I tried to get you expelled, Molly said. What a psycho bitch. Are you talking about Leah now? Molly laughed, which had not been the case years ago. A dead fox stuffed inside of her instrument case. Carson developed a kinship with the eccentric daughter of Pastor Kaufman, and as the only non-Caucasians, the two outsiders formed a bond in junior high. But when sports transformed Carson into a football star worthy of asking out Molly Knutson, Leah Kaufman grew dangerously jealous. But at the time, the acts of vandalism and desecration were attributed to him. But in hindsight, it was much more obvious. What do you think she's up to these days? I heard she's a scientist. Get out of town. A scientist? She was always smart. Crazy, but smart. I think Forsberg told me she was some kind of genetic engineer living in California. I thought she was in a mental institution. Oh, she was for a while, but then, you know, if they have to let out Norman Bates, they certainly had to let out Leah Kaufman. Molly's face grew solemn. I had a dream that she tried to burn down my house with me in it. I was running around looking for Summer, but I couldn't find her anywhere. All I could hear was her crying out to me. What about Penelope? Unlike Penelope, who had dark hair, Summer Rae Chauvin had vibrant blonde hair like her mother. Carson changed the subject. Any plans for the weekend? Dinner and a movie, most likely. You? Stargazing. My new telescope has arrived. After visiting with Molly, Carson made a purposeful trip to visit Nancy Crane. Like most of Split Rock, he'd had Mrs. Crane as his English teacher back in the day. Wally Crane and Brian Forsberg had been instrumental in his recovery following the accident and went beyond building ramps at the house. While Brian helped him physically rehab, Wally helped him emotionally cope with the loss. Now Carson meant to return the favor. Nancy slept most of the time, but during her physical therapy sessions, he saw some of the spark still in her eyes. Her breathing tube had been removed a few weeks ago, but paralysis on her right side kept her from being able to communicate. As soon as he rolled into her room, he saw a stranger, a typewriter. Wally came for breakfast each day and read the news to her, but today he left a typewriter on a small table. Right beside a few of her favorite novels, a bound stack of 8.5 by 11 pages were left on the shelf. Hey, Mrs. Crane. I just wanted to say goodbye for the weekend. My new telescope arrived, so I'm going to spend the weekend gazing up at the stars. I'll tell you what I see on Monday. Before he left, he rolled closer to the shelf and took the bound manuscript down from the shelf. Walking Through Shadows by Nancy Crane. Taking the manuscript down, he noticed the date for the chapters, 1988. Apparently, Nancy believes we'll survive the coming battle with the Wintermaker. After just a few pages, Carson caught the location, Ayers Rock, Australia, and the main character, a boy named Connor Wallace. Another 50 pages into the book, the location shifted to Mankato, Minnesota, and so did the central character, a college kid named Jude Kaufman. Kaufman? What are the odds? Of course, Mrs. Crane had once taught Leah Kaufman, so it didn't surprise him that she'd borrow a local name for a character. She set the manuscript back on the shelf. Mrs. Crane didn't react at all. When he returned to the Commons, the music had already started. Lacey Morrison, his new entertainment assistant, brought a ragtime song to life. While Carson could play piano only, Lacey could sing, and she belted out the lyrics for the residents. When the song ended, he rolled up beside her. "You cut your hair. Do you like it?" she said with a little enthusiasm. "I like it short, but the kids at school think I'm a lesbian now." No, it's, Carson withheld the flattery, afraid of it spoiling things between them. Despite being a kid, Lacey Morrison fearlessly wore revealing shirts and short skirts in contrast to the cotton uniforms of the nurses. She was beautiful in a sporty way, and also a Morrison. It reminds me of Molly Ringwald, the girl from the Breakfast Club," she recoiled. "Thanks, I think." "She's a Hollywood movie star." "Well, I'm too flat and short to be a movie star," Lacey shrugged and started in with the next song. "Well done, creepy old man." Carson rolled away to the front doors, where his van service waited to bring him home. In the observation tower, Carson studied the sky. Somewhere behind the sun, Halley's Comet hid after returning from the nether regions. In a few weeks, it would come out from behind its spin behind the sun and pass right by the Earth. In its wake, it would bathe the Earth in magic. Magic. Years earlier, Leah Kaufman had sparked his interest in magic. As the adopted daughter of Pastor Kaufman, she rebelled against her Lutheran upbringing. Convinced she was a gypsy left on their doorstep, she studied Eastern religions before getting a fixation on Chippewa culture during her freshman year. Many kids thought she was native, so Leah embraced the fallacy. Now, looking up at the stars, he could remember bits and pieces of her stories. The Pleiades, Leah taught him, represented hole in the day and had spiritual connections to the Sweat Lodge purification ceremony. "It's through the hole in space that human bodies both enter and leave our universe," Leah added. "The entrance is guarded by a being called Grandmother Spider." He also remembered the story about the Big Dipper. Instead of a bear, Ursa Major, the Ojibwe saw a smaller creature, the Fisher Cat. The Fisher Cats are fierce warriors, unafraid of danger. Because of this, Ojig the Fisher Cat volunteered to fight against the evil sorcerer who captured the summer birds in an attempt to keep the seasons from changing. During the battle, they climbed into the stars, where the Fisher Cat was pierced with an arrow in its tail. Carson had asked who would try to stop the seasons. Leah pointed to Orion. "Some call him Misabe, the giant, but most call him Babuniki, the winter maker. Just as winter brings death, Babuniki tried to bring death to the whole world by trapping the summer birds and bringing eternal winter to the earth." "I'm glad someone tried to stop him," Carson said as the two sat out on Doc Jones Bridge late at night. Now, years later, Carson remembered the conversation in his telescope tower. With the final approach of Halley's Comet, he worried duty might fall to him, and he'd never been good with Tess.